Chapter 30. Ignocerus, protege. Ipsi voluntas de est. The knock on Parker's hotel room door was crisp and insistent. If it was Martin, he would never open the door, but he couldn't imagine that she would venture into his realm, and certainly not at midnight. He set the box of wheat thins on the nightstand, brushed the crumbs off his chest and onto the floor when he stood. He thought about turning off the TV, but if the wrong person were at the door, he or she would know he was awake, and he couldn't use the excuse that he was asleep or that he didn't hear the knock because the TV was too loud. He trudged over to the door and put his eye against the peephole. Covering the entire fisheye field of vision was a clear plastic liter bottle with a spray plunger. It dropped away and a face moved into view and moved toward the peephole until the only thing that was visible was a massive eye. The eye moved away until the whole head was visible. Parker muttered at the door, "Crap, it's Skinner. Parker, I know you're in there. We've got work to do." Skinner held up the bottle. "See." Parker knew it had to be luminol. "Look, Parker, I'm not leaving until you come out. I'll bang on this damn door all night." "Skinner, have you got a cog loose?" "Undoubtedly, but we're doing this tonight. Right now." "Okay." Parker opened the door and Skinner, smiling mischievously, entered the room with the bottle stretched arm's length in front of him. "Time to spray a wall," he announced with exaggerated delight. "You've really got a thing for that wall, don't you?" "I just think there might be something there." "What makes you think that? You having psychic visions?" "I thought I saw something on the wall. You know, when the sun reflected off it." "I think you've been writing those freaky stories for too long. You're starting to believe that supernatural shit is real." When Parker truly heard what he just said, an unexpected thought pulled into view. Either that supernatural shit, as he had called it, was real, or he had gone insane because that was rapidly becoming the world in which he might be living. Parker stared at Skinner through the peephole. Skinner smirked, and once again Parker felt that niggling, vague suspicion. "Well, get your ass ready, dude, we've got a wall waiting for us," Skinner said just a little too brightly to be genuine. "Okay, you head on over to Lambda, and I'll meet you there." Parker thought briefly about knocking on Susan's door, but this was a shot in the dark, and he was merely indulging what he believed was a Skinner whim. Besides, Susan was an early-to-bed, early-to-rise person, and it just didn't seem to be worth her trouble. Martin's reflection. All Martin could see in the mirror were horizontal short thin bloody rows scratched from one temple across her forehead just above her eyebrows to the other temple. From the end of each eye, several rows of scratches ran to the hairline. 3 more rows ran from her hairline, across her nose to her other hairline. She wanted to wipe the blood away, but she couldn't move her arms. She wanted to close her eyes, but she couldn't. She was trapped in front of the mirror, caged by the vision. Slowly, letter by bloody letter, a message began to appear on the mirror. IGNOSCERIS. And then in rapid succession the rest, protege. Ipsi voluntas de est. She stared at it. She wanted to erase it from her mind, from her life. She tried to reach out to wipe it away, and with it the command she had to obey, but her arms would still not move. A loud knock on the door staggered her away from the mirror. She was freed from her trance. The message on the mirror had vanished. The bloody cuts on her face had vanished. The message, the command, still rang loudly in her mind. "You are forgiven. Protect him. He is the will of God." Her heart pounded. Tears filled her eyes. She became dizzy. She grabbed the bathroom sink to balance herself. She wanted this to end. She wanted to be free. But her will was not her own, and she feared it never would be. She was determined to end this torment, somehow, someway. Before she went to the door, she wanted to get her 9mm Glock from the nightstand next to her bed, but she couldn't move that way. She was guided to her apartment door and waited for another knock. There was none. She looked through the peephole. There was only darkness. She cautiously opened the door. She could hear faint footsteps fading. She had an uncontrollable urge to leave. She wanted to get dressed, but she couldn't turn back to her apartment. She turned right. As she walked past her window, she saw herself mirrored in it. She was already fully clothed. She couldn't remember getting dressed. Tears were running down her face. Fear and terror gripped her. She fought against each step she was being forced to take, but she kept walking. Even in the cool night air, she was sweating profusely. She wished to be dead, but she knew that even that would be impossible. Destination. When she slid into her car, her destination was clear, the Lambda Zone. Who would be there was clear, Skinner and Parker. What they were going to do was clear. Why she had been commanded to go there, she didn't know. But she had to go. The Lambda Zone was still alive at midnight. The dead zone of the parking lot was still cordoned off, the floodlights still on. Parker's observation. Parker heard a car pull into the parking lot. As the car door opened, Parker glanced over his shoulder. It was Martin. She reached into the car and took out a cardboard tray with 2 coffees. Oh crap, Parker thought. This isn't going to be good. He wondered how she knew they were there. He hadn't told her, and he couldn't imagine Skinner telling her. Not with their history. But their recent interactions indicated that their relationship wasn't as it had been. So it had to have changed. After all, he was here and she hadn't said, "Skinner, get the hell out of here." Confrontation. Parker turned back to the wall and expected Skinner to be looking at Lindy after she butt-slammed the door of the car. But as if he didn't notice her, he moved toward the wall with the bottle of luminol pointed at it. Martin walked up and stopped beside Parker. He cringed. Here it comes, he thought. She's going to lay into Skinner and then into me for invading her crime scene without her present. Get prepared. She said nothing. She just stared at the wall. Parker looked at her. She dispassionately looked at him, handed him a coffee, and then returned her attention to the wall. Parker was confused by her gesture. She had remembered and taken the time to add cream and a little sugar. He sipped a small amount to test the temperature. It was still a little too hot, but the warmth felt good in his hand. Was she signaling an end to the hostility? Or did she have some agenda? He gave a long, hard look at the cup. No, she wouldn't. She couldn't hate me that much. Skinner's actions. Skinner looked up at the floodlight. He bent and picked up a loose piece of asphalt and threw it at the floodlight. Like a guided missile, it stuck dead center and the light exploded. Parker looked at Martin, expecting her to climb up Skinner's back and down his throat. She just stared at that wall. Revelation. Walking back and forth in front of the wall with the spray bottle, Skinner sprayed in long, broad strokes. Bits and pieces began to appear. They formed letters and then words. Amazed, Parker took a step back. He had not expected this. Damn, he did leave a message and in blood. Spooky, you've outdone yourself. Parker muttered to himself. LA, way to go. How'd you know? Parker said. It's the imagination of a writer, he answered as he continued to spray. After using Spooky for the novel, I felt like I knew him. When there were no notes found on the bodies, I asked myself if I were him, what would I do? I figured that he must have used a different method because he wouldn't go to this extent and not leave a message. So, I asked myself what other way could he have left his message, and this is what I came up with. Amazing. So, you just put yourself in the mind of a psychotic. I guess you could say that. LA, I don't know how you do that. You have to have a pretty demented mind to come up with that. Parker chuckled. Hey, what can I say? It's a talent. Skinner gave the wall a final spray and backed away from the wall. Latin. The Vulgate Bible again. In blurry blood-written letters were, Propteria tradidit illos Deus in passiones ignominiae, nam femini eram immutavert naturalem, usum in eum, usum ca est contra naturam. Similiter autem et masculi relicto naturali usu femini exarcerant in desiderius sui, in invisum masculi in masculos turpitudinem operans et merstem quam, opertuit erroris sui in semet ipsis recipiens. There's no question now. The spooky. He's back, Parker remarked. Parker stepped away from the wall, pulled out his cell phone, and called Susan. As he suspected, she was asleep. He informed her of what they had found. She said that she would be dressed and be there as quickly as she could. A group began to gather just outside the taped-off zone. Two couples, one of well-toned males hand in hand and one of finely toned females wrapped tightly around each other, stopped and watched. Soon several more people, some couples, some singles, some embracing, all stylishly attired, gathered outside the crime scene tape. Suddenly, Martin began translating the Latin verses. Parker's eyes widened. She knows Latin? As if it were her second language, Martin casually read the inscription. For this cause, God delivered them up to shameful affections. For their women have changed the natural use into that use which is against nature. And in like manner, the men also, leaving the natural use of the women, have burned in their lusts one towards another, men with men working that which is filthy, and receiving in themselves the recompense which was due to their error. The crowd began to mumble. The female couple decoupled. The tall, blonde female moved close to the tape. "Excuse me." Then louder. "Excuse me." Parker turned and looked at the blonde. "Yes. Does this have something to do with the two bodies that were found here?" "I'm sorry. I can't talk about an ongoing investigation." "Okay, let's do it this way. If you don't say it doesn't, then that will mean that it does." Parker turned and stood silently. "Thank you." She turned to the crowd and announced that the writing was connected to the two bodies. Parker could feel the fear in the crowd, and it was certainly justified. He felt a need to calm them, but if fear or anger caused them to be extremely cautious, calming them was the last thing he wanted to do. The fear might save someone's life. With that caution in mind, he addressed the crowd. "I know what happened is terrible, and we're going to do everything we can to find out who did this. But you must understand that we need your help if we are going to catch this maniac. Be vigilant. If you have seen anyone suspicious, especially in a hoodie hanging around the club, give Seattle Police Department a call, and please get the word out to the LGBT community to be cautious. If any of you see anything suspicious, call. We want to bring the person to justice as much as you do." "I doubt that. You're not gay. You don't know what it's like to." "How do you know I'm not gay? Are you?" "No." "So you're right." It was the intense frustration in her voice, not the comment, to which Parker then responded. "I have no idea what you have to put up with, what it's like. And now, to know that there's someone out there who wants to kill you and do it so brutally, I can't imagine the fear and anger you must feel. But I will tell you this. I will do everything I can to catch this man." He looked past her and raised his voice to the crowd. "Everything and anything that any of you can do will help. Just call the Seattle police, and they'll put you in touch with me." Echoing off the wall came, "Abomination." It was loud. Parker turned toward the wall. Skinner was facing the crowd, transfixed, the bottle dangling from his index finger. A thin, balding man with a black goatee stepped forward. "What did you say?" Matter-of-factly, Skinner looked directly at the man and dispassionately repeated, "Abomination." Parker stepped between the two. He frowned harshly at Skinner and then turned to the man. "He's only repeating what a witness heard the suspect say. He's not calling anyone an abomination." Parker turned back to Skinner and sternly said, "Right?" Skinner didn't answer. He turned back to the wall. Parker bored his eyes into the back of Skinner's head and loudly said, "Right?" Skinner went rigid. His head turned slowly over his shoulder. Their eyes met. The headlights of a passing car flashed its high beams. The bright lights hit Parker's eyes. He squinted, turned his head away, and blinked several times. When he looked back, Skinner was facing him, and for the briefest of moments, Skinner's face turned pure luminescent white, and his eyes became deep pitch-black holes. Skinner's head jerked slightly. He blinked several times. "That That's right. It's not me. I meant the killer. Then he turned back to the wall. Spooky case developments. Since Melinda had insisted on being apprised of any new developments on the new spooky case, she was informed that Agents Parker and Simpson had returned to the crime scene to test out a new theory. She phoned her team to come in. Took an hour before Melinda and the forensic team arrived. By that time, the crowd was gone. They took a dozen shots of the message. The team took several scrapings of the blood from the wall. Annoyed by the early hour, Melinda barked at the crew constantly, and then apologized constantly. No amount of coffee was going to improve her disposition. This case was eating away at her sleep, and this early morning trip was the icing on the cake. Doubling her foul mood was the knowledge that the message had been found by Skinner, a writer and a man with limited forensic knowledge, most of which he got from Melinda. Parker tapped Melinda on the shoulder. She whirled around, fixed on the person's eyes, and snarled, "What?" Parker stepped back, made a cross with his index fingers, and held the cross out in front of him. "Be gone, Satan. Leave this woman's body." He stepped forward, craned his neck, and peered into her eyes as if he were searching for something. "Melinda, are you in there?" He turned to one of the team members and asked, "Can anyone here perform an exorcism? I think Melinda's possessed." Melinda smiled. "Sorry. Long nights. Frustration." Parker motioned his hand towards Agent Simpson as she approached the group. "Melinda, this is Agent Simpson. Agent Simpson, this is Melinda. She's usually a very nice person, but I guess someone ran over her pet gerbil. So, she's in a foul mood. Don't listen to him. I don't have a gerbil. I have a pet snake just to keep people like him away." Agent Simpson smiled. "Don't worry. I rarely believe what he tells me about people." "Good. So, I understand you found a message. Latin again?" Melinda inquired. "Yes. And oddly Detective Martin could translate it. I didn't know that she knew Latin. Neither did I, but I guess she does. So, I thought you might want to go back over the area in case we missed something. While we certainly missed the message, I doubt that we missed any evidence, but we're combing the place again. But I'll bet you a year's pay that we find nothing. This guy just doesn't leave any evidence behind. Have some faith. We were thorough. Hey, maybe we'll find a bloody print on the wall. Right?" Melinda said sarcastically. Melinda frowned, turned back to her crew, and yelled, "Are we done here yet?" They weren't. Melinda found TV and the movie's portrayal of case-breaking evidence to be silly. Finding a bloody print on a wall would be extremely rare. In fact, she had never had one. Neither did she expect that the killer would conveniently step in the pool of blood and leave the case-breaking bloody shoe print, which just happened to be of a patterned shoe tread with a telling small slice on the heel that could only have come from the killer's boot, which was exclusively sold by one store and purchased recently with a credit card. So far, the killer just hadn't been cooperating. He willingly left messages, protestations of sins against God's word, but he remained anonymous. Maybe he didn't want to take credit for God's work, or maybe he had bigger plans with more murders. Melinda feared the latter, but it didn't matter. She felt that Spooky was going to kill again anyway. It may be in a day, a week, a month, or another 6 years, but he would do it again. Of that, she was certain. But as for finding him, she held only a slim hope. He was just too damn careful. Melinda had to bear the fruitless effort for another half hour. Her crew gathered their equipment, packed, and left. Within another half hour, everyone was gone except Parker. While Parker was the last to leave the parking lot of the Lambda Zone, he never made it back to his hotel. At the urging of his curiosity and an annoying inkling that there was something more there, he had returned. What more, he didn't know, just more. Instinct, suspicion. As his car approached the parking lot, he lowered the dingy driver window to get a clearer view. The crime scene tape still hung from orange pylons. Several loose strands drifted and fluttered in the night wind. Parker got out of the car, closed the door, leaned against the Ford Escort's top, and stared at the two biblical verses. He read and reread them for nearly 40 minutes, trying to remember Martin's translation. Some of the Latin was close enough to English so that he could recapture the meaning. Basically, the passages said that homosexuality was a sin. The verses didn't say what Catholics who believed in the Vulgate Bible should do to the violators. This killer had made that judgment himself. However, there was no indication that these two victims were actually guilty of the sin or any sin. Since they were human, they most certainly were guilty of some sin. If they weren't, Parker figured that the killer wasn't really killing sinners. He was sending a message about the sin. "I guess this'll attract a lot more attention than nailing up posters or handing out flyers," he said to the wall. If the message was the real purpose and the bodies were his grotesque version of flashing red lights to get attention, expending resources trying to find a connection between the victims and the LGBT community could prove to be a fruitless distraction. What Parker did know was that this was an unambiguous and public statement of the killer's belief in the passages of the Catholic Vulgate Bible condemning homosexuality. Knowing this narrowed down the search to people with knowledge of and access to the Vulgate Bible. Those would be Catholic priests and nuns and a few parishioners. However, it was still possible that the killer was not a priest or nun or even Catholic. All the killer would need was knowledge of the Vulgate Bible, and Parker reasoned that he could get that from the internet. He took a final look at the verses on the wall, opened the car door, bent low, and rolled himself into the seat. He pumped the accelerator and turned the key, and waited for the four-banger to rumble. He flipped on the headlights, shoved the gear into drive, cranked the wheel to the left, and hit the gas gently. The Escort swung around. Its lights passed across the wall and the verses vanished in the beams. Something flashed in the corner of his eye. He slammed on the brakes and looked over his shoulder. Nothing. He was sure there had been something. He put the car in reverse, turned the wheel to the left, and backed up until the lights lit a 30-foot spot on the wall. Defying the laws of chemistry, the verses were glowing. Stretched wide above the verses were 20-foot tattered, black wings. They flapped 4 times, and on the 5th time, they folded over each other as they devoured streams of luminescent letters. Inside the winged cocoon, the light swirled around, peeking through the hundreds of small tears in the wings. The high-pitched screech of a hawk echoed off the wall as the wings squeezed tightly together. Inside, a bright light flashed. Parker instinctively covered his eyes. When he opened them, the wall was bare. The only sound, the fluttering of the crime scene tape. Parker's hands began to tremble. His arms twitched. His body shook. He felt an icy streak rush through him and then a piercing pain in his shoulders. He reached under the collar of his shirt and touched his right shoulder. His hand felt dry, but he could feel the punctures. They felt deeper, almost deep enough to push his entire finger in. Although his shoulders burned with even a slight touch, he felt an uncontrollable urge to drive his finger into one of the holes. He forced his finger in. He grimaced. He probed deeper. The pain came in streams as he dug. His shoulder was on fire, but he couldn't stop himself. At the tip of his finger, he felt a sharp point. He dug deeper, surrounding it with his finger. The pain shot like fiery needles through his body. Whatever the object was, he had to pull it out. It had to be removed. He gritted his teeth, tensed every muscle against the pain, and slowly pulled it out. The pain vanished. He felt the hole close. In his hand, he felt a 4-inch long, 1-inch in diameter curved object that tapered down to a sharp point. He got out of the car, went around to the headlights, and looked at it. It was a bird's large black talon. His mind began to race. This was impossible. This can't happen. It's beyond all reason. He began to shake again. He jerked his head around, looking for the source of the fear that he felt was surrounding him. There was only silence. His legs wobbled. He braced himself against the hood of the car. He gathered himself and sat in the car, holding the talon tightly. He was afraid that if he let it go, it would disappear and there would be no proof of what he had experienced. And if it vanished, he was afraid that it would be proof of another kind. He was delusional, insane. Pressing the last 2 fingers of his left hand against the palm to hold the talon, he wrapped the first 2 fingers and thumb of his right hand around the steering wheel. As he drove back to the hotel, he tried to piece his thoughts together. Having the bizarre dreams was difficult enough to rationalize. But at least they were dreams. Seeing the cloaked cowlets man was odd but still within the realm of reality. However, shadowy black wings swallowing streams of glowing letters was well outside all things natural. Whatever he had been experiencing, he knew it wasn't a tumor or any physiological problem that could be detected by an MRI. The MRI had eliminated a few of his concerns, but in doing so, it created a worry that something else was causing the bizarre experiences. Had he been drugged? Martin's coffee? That was the only explanation that made sense. Then it didn't make sense. He had the visions before he had even arrived in Seattle. Parker realized that if he was looking for an explanation in the real, normal world, he had run out of reasonable, semi-reasonable, and unreasonable ones. Thus, he was delusional and the talon was only in his mind, or the talon was real and something else, something unnatural was happening. But he couldn't deny that clutched in his hand was the black talon. Parker slept holding tightly to the talon. If it was still there in the morning to show Susan, he wasn't losing his mind. If it wasn't there, he might have already gone insane. What he feared even more than waking without the talon in his hand was another dream of giant birds ripping their talons into his shoulders. What he didn't expect but received was another terrifying nightmare of a frail old man with skin like shrunken, wrinkled, worn leather hovering above him, and then thrusting two long, bony fingers into his shoulder blade and rooting out another talon. As the old man pulled out the talon, the pain woke Parker. For a split second, a black shadow floated above him and then vanished. Parker's heart was pounding. He reached behind and felt his shoulder blade blood and a new hole. He hurried to the bathroom and looked into the mirror. The blood seeping out of the wound was drawn back in. As he stared at the wound, it closed. The mirror melted. The room darkened. He drifted into that darkness.